So, Mark, I don't want you to leave, but it's 4:53. Can you stay?
Probably should be going within the next couple of minutes here.
All right. What else? We got the quantum entanglement. Maybe we should jump into the Ryan. So, to backtrack a little bit, we had an argument with Eddie West in which, Mark, you took Eddie's side to an extent, and Brian took mine. And my idea was that feminism and stuff is a little misguided because you can never get a feminist to acknowledge a positive quality or virtue attached to masculinity. So they'll talk all day about toxic masculinity and the bad parts of it. But if you ask them, what's a good thing about, the majority of men or masculinity, the answer is those are just gendered roles. Those are just taught to people. I don't believe in them. I don't believe any quality that a human has is masculine or feminine. So that's the answer you'll get. Even though their thing is called feminism, which seems to imply that it has to do with the feminine. But so I think that's my suggestion was that we look at it that every individual has both masculine and feminine traits in different ratios. And men tend to have more masculine traits on average, and women feminine traits. But there's tons of exceptions all over the place. And that attributing qualities to those two genders would be useful because it reflects biological facts about sex and hormones, and B, because it helps us understand the way there's a battle within us to do. You'll have two equal wisdoms, like my jujitsu example. Either compete and say F it to everything else, and I want to be a champion, or on the other hand, just be happy with the progress and the journey, and appreciate the friends you've made and the getting in shape and all that. So those two wisdoms to me are not compatible. And it helps me to explain that by calling them masculine and feminine. So, Ryan, you said you could unravel my theory and sort of debunk it, or
yeah. I mean, first off, I think it's a bit of an extreme statement to say that no feminist would ever say anything positive about masculinity ever. To use the word "never" in that statement, I think that's just such a broad stroke. And there might be
that's fine. But are you saying that it's not even that doesn't reflect feminism at all, or much of them?
I think there are many people
because all the women on the show that I've asked it to
themselves as feminine,
which has been two,
four,
but would have not a problem, complimenting men on male tendencies that they have.
Right, but this is an intellectual discussion. It's about masculinity. So I say, what are some positive traits or values that you assign to masculinity? Like people might have used to say courage or competitiveness or something. These are just common sense things. But
that's another semantic thing that I'll take a step back from that piece. But you used the analogy last time that with jiu-jitsu of that there's the one attitude of I lost, I need to do everything I can over the next year or so till next year's championship happens. That to train myself and push myself so that at all costs I'll keep pushing.
It's the attitude of champions for eons.
And the other one being, it's okay that you lost. It was the journey to be here.
I tried hard. My opponent
and every
was
part of this
good.
was worthwhile, and this was just the end of it. And yes, I would have maybe preferred to win, but
right.
I shouldn't destroy myself.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary to make one of those masculine or feminine in themselves, because those are just two different attitudes that, while I might agree that there's difference in male and females based on hormones and physical differences, those two ideologies don't have to be gendered in one way or the other. The fact that there's a binary there doesn't mean every time there's a binary we have to assign masculinity to one and femininity to the other. Now, I
not
think
every binary, no, but wouldn't it be strange if we didn't do that, because men tend to attribute that first thing far more often than women? Is that just a coincidence?
But, but that'd be the same. So it'd be like saying, if you're a criminal, you're black, and if you're law-abiding citizen. You're white,
right? Because
you're going to take percentages and go, more blacks commit crime than whites, and so we're going to set it up that way. I mean, it just like Ryan's saying, it just does not make sense to me to attribute either of those two ideologies to one to male and one to female, because like I said before, Ronda Rousey, I know plenty of women in athletics and other fields that are very determined in that way, and if they lose, they don't want to lose again, and they want to do anything they can to not lose again.
And I think there's plenty of successful women out there,
right? But you all understand,
and there's plenty of men
that none of that is incompatible with my theory.
It is incompatible when you say that people that do that are more masculine and people that.
But in my theory, women can be masculine.
I understand, but and
very masculine sometimes. But it's an exception, right? It's an outlier, and that definitely is. Ronda Rousey is the definition of an outlier. There's very few MMA fighters that are women.
I think Ronda Rousey might take exception to you calling her very masculine and attributing that masculinity to her because of
whether it hurts her feelings or not, because of what's attached to those words is another issue.
Throw a couple other pieces into this game here, and go from there. So the challenge then is, I don't think those ideologies, those attitudes, is what they are. Their attitudes can be linked to physiology, because you can see females, and whether you're talking about a stereotypical female role or not, applying those things constantly. Whether it's trying to achieve their own goals, whether it's science or something that's not physical, or raising their children. The idea that it's okay that my kid is going to get hit by a car as long as it was the journey of raising him the first 8 years, and that was all that really mattered, is not going to apply.
No, but that's different. There are two ways to deal with the death of a child, and that is you were making fun of it, but accepting it is one way to do that. Also,
but would you attribute that to male or female? Would you say that someone that accepts the fact that their child died, and then they might be super sad.
Every attitude that embraces like the totality of life and kind of calms itself, I consider that feminine approach to things, and I value it very much.
First off, let me say,
women do it, but that makes sense within my theory, because in my theory, every woman has masculine traits.
But you can also attribute that to East or West then, because it's a lot more of an Eastern philosophy to accept things.
It's also what Nietzsche would recall a slave morality, where you're okay with everything the way it is because you're kind of fucked.
Right.
That's a bit of a stretch. He was very much a proponent of affirmation of the past, of saying yes to everything that has come before. Was it really that shocking, though, that people are told to stay in their place, are told to not worry so much about the achievement, that you don't allow to fight and achieve that? But let me say one other thing here about Myers-Briggs, right? Myers-Briggs tests, they're personality tests. You find male and females all score in all categories in all different ways. Mm-hmm. These have to do a lot of these types of ideologies you're talking about. I've had to go to multiple types of what they call leadership conferences. And at each of these conferences, you take these personality tests. They're all based on Myers-Briggs in one way or the other. Mm-hmm. There's the DISC method, there's the most recent one I took, where the idea is everyone is either a warrior, an explorer, an artist, or a judge. Right. But is all...
No, it's not. So the idea is this. Whether they're males or females in the room, no matter what it is, people are evenly distributed almost every time.
That's because these tests were built in PC culture for the very reason of not allowing men to be in one side and women on the other.
These are all things about dominance, and so I almost always end up in the dominant one with all the women, which are the exact same personality type. These are evenly distributed personality types. I don't believe...
Jung found that to be completely not true. If you read the 8 personality types in Jung, he'll say, like, intuitive feeling, for example. He said this type is almost always women. So Myers-Briggs and...
Yeah, actually, John's right about that. There is not a strict 50-50 across all personality types. For instance, both John and I are INTJ, and that's much more male-dominated than it is female.
I would agree with that, but I'd also say you can't knock the point that women who've acted in those ways, they've had their hand slapped many times throughout our culture. Every time they try to even emote anything along that lines. They're a bitch as soon as they fall into the warrior category.
Certainly.
And you can't deny the level of social pressure to push people away from that. The idea to even appear to be in that method,
certainly,
never mind to act in that
There's
method.
a lot of social pressure. And when any individuals that I see that operating on, I feel bad, and I try to go against it anytime I can. That's different, very different from the intellectual construct I'm building up. And the fundamental point that I have is that feminists will tell you that if you got to get rid of all gender roles, and then all of this uneven distribution of careers and choices and preferences, that will all go away because it's all taught to us as babies. Now, if you go through this thought experiment, you will quickly realize, I believe, just through intuition, how wrong that is. So there's no children now in this world that we're talking about are taught anything about gender roles. There's no gender roles. There's no expectation of what men and women are going to do.
Yeah, but there's also every TV show, movie, and every piece of media.
It's a thought experiment, Ryan.
Okay.
Those things aren't there.
Okay.
It's a world without gender roles.
Okay,
right.
gotcha.
So we know that physiologically and mentally, boys are. These are just a few examples. Boys are more likely to cry, and they're easy to startle when they're babies and toddlers.
Here's an example. All boys, no matter how much of a queen they are, will pick up sticks and start hitting trees with them. They all do it.
Yeah,
it's so much fun.
And a lot of girls will do that too.
Fun.
Now, so we know that girls start off with better language skills.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And boys early on have better spatial reasoning skills. And then they catch up, the girls catch up, but then the boys pull away again a little bit in later adolescence. And then you get things like just physiological things. The boys are going to get taller, even in this perfect feminist world, right?
Right.
More upper body strength. The girls are going to be, they're going to have their period. So all the things that come along with that in life, that physiological reality, good things, bad things, all the many complicated things, that's going to happen, even in this perfect thought experiment, right? And women also will still be having babies, and that will be a very influential on how they grow up and how they act and behave and the careers they choose. And so, I'm not a men's rights guy, and I hate those people, because if you're going to pick a side to be an activist for, it makes no sense. It's like you got rape on one hand, and then you have false rape accusations on the other. And no matter what the percentage is, no one really knows. The false rape accusation is a tiny, tiny sliver compared to real rapes.
Sure.
So if you're going to pick a side, one of those to be an activist for, you should probably pick the anti-rape side. That's how I view men's rights activists. They're idiots.
Except for that shows a bias right there, because you're saying real rape versus false rape accusations, when rape occurs to men on a pretty big scale comparatively to what people think.
Oh yeah, prison.
So not just prison.
Otherwise.
When you're a kid, there's plenty of predators that will sexually abuse
I know, but
you.
how many even?
And then this is a tangent.
Sure.
But I'm just saying, for you to equate, okay, if you're going to be pro men, then you're mad at false rape accusations, and if you're pro women, you're mad at rape. Right. Whereas if you're pro men, you could also be mad at rape.
Right. But men's rights activists are a specific thing, and they are never against rape. All they talk about is how the statistics are wrong.
Right.
And the studies are wrong. But anyway, the point is, so you grow up in this perfect feminist world, and these career choices and stuff will naturally start to deviate again, and maybe even more than they do now, because now you have a counter force, which is PC culture, which is saying women need to be CEOs, they have to be athletes, and they have to be superheroes that can beat up men. And so there's still a lot of push for women to be the housewife and all the shitty old things.
Match the masculine tropes.
Right, it has to be
men
equality,
are really good
not
at that.
empowerment.
Right, and because not all men should be CEOs, nor should all women be CEOs.
Right, and women are think they all need to be.
I would say in that world that you talk about, you would see a more even distribution with still probably some tendencies to lean one way or the other.
Probably?
Yes.
You think it might be 52 to 48%, because that's the percentage of women to men?
To the amount of people I work with who have personality types or the values that you're pointing out to as masculine, who are women, who have those personality types, and also recognize that saying that the journey is the destination, that's all that really matters, would fly in the face of everything they do all day long and every belief that they have.
It's just one example. That's not.
But women would never be able to accomplish anything if they all felt that way.
Well,
I didn't say that they do.
My problem with your theory is that there's too many other variables besides sex to consider and influence people. What about when we were cavemen? And were men still taller than women? Or was everyone at a closer?
It might have been
norm
less of a sexual dimorphism.
Because men were definitely shorter than they are today.
Oh yeah.
So that's an evolutionary trait, right? That happened through.
No, that's not evolution. The tallerness is
selection,
hygiene.
natural selection.
It's nutrition. No, it's nutrition. It's that we've grown by like 4 inches in the last 100 years. That's too quick for evolution. It's because we get more protein and vegetables now.
So you're saying if something happens quickly, it's not evolution? What about viruses mutating?
Yeah,
that's not evolution.
No, I guess that is, but
but it happens fastly.
But that's on the tiny scale when tiny organisms can evolve faster.
Humans getting taller isn't necessarily for genetic differences.
Yeah, it's not genetic.
The genes potentially are the same, but they're getting more what they need as they're developing.
The 5'6" guy in 1850 would have been 6 feet tall or taller if you gave him food when he was a kid.
If you found a new gene that made everyone taller that didn't exist 100 years ago, you could say yes, that's evolution. That's evolution. Yeah. But the idea this is just a better circumstance that this changed it. But
in the broad sense, it is evolution.
So
change over time.
You just lost your whole entire paleo fan base.
Damn it! That was my core.
John, I have a question for you. So originally, as you phrased the question, we do jujitsu. You lose. You have 2 choices, which is one. You get gun ho, you say, I'm going to do it next year. You train like a motherfucker, and you hopefully do it.
Right.
Second thing is like, okay, I'm badass. I did well. Go me. But there are other choices on the table. I mean, like, if you're like me or someone else, I've seen a lot of people who are like, I'm a piece of shit. I failed miserably. Let me go cut myself in the corner now.
Yeah.
I mean, is that male or female?
Well, what? Cutting yourself? Self-hate? I don't know. The reason that I take... There are other ways you can go. You're right. Sure. The reason I highlight those is because they're not compatible. They're opposite from each other. But you can go...
But you also
can go in the middle.
Between them, too. Like the day of it, you might help yourself get through that day by one opinion, but then the day after, go back to the other one.
But you acknowledge that you have to do one or the other at any given time. And the champions in real life, they don't do, hey, Mark... Have a good time in Phoenix, man. Be safe on the road, and say goodbye to the folks.
Bye-bye, folks.
We'll
see you next week.
We'll see you next week, my man. Have a good time. The real champions in life, in the world, they are... I don't think you know what they're like. They're so...
I have an idea what the champions are like. I'm not saying that they
the
don't have that
reason I
attitude.
categorize those 2 things in the gender ways is because, for me, masculine and femininity are... fundamentally opposed. They're fundamentally different. They're always it's like yin and yang. They're always battling. And that's true about that's what it leads to reproduction. It's so the sexual difference of male and female is so fundamental to life
between male and female without attaching them to ideas and personality traits that both sides have.
Okay, so
all the time.
All right, so you can't be right about both of these things. So you said that I'm overgeneralizing about what all feminists say on this question. So let me ask the question to you. And you're probably a feminist in terms of the different dictionary definition. I sure am. Sure. In terms of equal rights under the law for women. Mm-hmm. Can you name a positive quality of masculinity?
What I would say the positive quality of masculinity is often the emphasis on the results of a situation, often above and beyond the relationship within the organization of the people in the process. So oftentimes I think a trait that you could fairly say to men versus women is that females are often more aware or more concerned with the relationships of the people involved in a process.
Right.
And potentially the man is more likely to be on the results and trying to get there. The key thing is to be successful in any one of these situations, you have to do a little bit of both of those.
Right.
But ultimately, the female still might really want the result and know how important the result is, but might go about it in a different way.
Right.
And I think where the biggest differences you might see between male and female are approach, what ideas came to them first, different instincts in these situations, which isn't to say that everything else has to be different. The end game, even the end philosophy, might still be remarkably similar between two people, but the motivations for getting there and the methods are more likely to be what's gendered in those situations. But that trying to actually firmly draw lines for what is or isn't masculine or feminine, it just gets increasingly problematic.
But you just did it.
I think it is very difficult because those things
isn't
general tendencies, but it's
right.
But beyond that,
your challenge to me is equally relevant to your own thing that you just came up with.
What I just said there does not have anything to do one way or the other, though, with the idea of, am I going to train every day for the next year or not? Because that's the masculine.
Well, you're taking issue with my example. I mean, in other words, like another one would be competitiveness versus cooperation. That would be a distinction where obviously the first is what I would say masculine, the second is feminine. But it seems like no matter who I can explain this to or how many times, everyone they say, that doesn't make sense, John. I know a lot of competitive women. I'm like, yeah, I know. Every human has masculinity in them.
I know, but why?
But how many
more? I don't
more?
know why you need to put ownership on a particular gender. And here's where another problem comes, right? So say we're trying to pick a leader, all right, whether it's a leader of the organization, a leader of the team, or whatever it is.
President.
Right? And we say, we've already established that all the best leadership traits are masculine. And we're trying to find the person.
Sexist. That's wrong. Who would say that?
Well,
they'd be wrong to say that. So I'm not in that group. I'm not that guy. I'm not saying all the best leaders.
Well,
nothing. All the best.
Then.
Anything
Say
is
I'm
masculine.
looking for a person who will stick with it and not give up and will not look at the opinion of the journey.
We'll say, we want a cutthroat.
I want a person who's going to be results oriented and doesn't care about anything else.
Right.
The idea is and we've established that this particular role at this moment, that's who we need to solve this job.
Right.
By saying that that's a masculine trait, you're already putting at a disadvantage someone who you're going to associate with having less likely to have a strong ability to achieve that trait. You're already going to handicap anyone who, by their very nature, is not masculine because they don't have a penis.
Right, but it still works because you can still find masculine women like Ronda Rousey. They're still around. You just need to see their resume
and know that the urge to match things. So the idea of that masculine matches.
This is Eddie's argument. You're just agreeing with him completely.
Well, I think one thing that's worth bringing up is something that Brian brought up, which is that John is essentially trying to lay the groundwork for everyone to see that we're all in this together. We all have male and female.
Totally
chicks.
agree with that noble cause.
The one thing I'm surprised Eddie didn't bring up, based on his first episode with you, is that your theory is, you could say, you could bring up Occam's razor again, the law of parsimony, which is essentially like you're adding another layer to something that doesn't necessarily need to have it. It's just, why can't it just be like,
well, first of all,
you're kind of aggressive, and you're kind of not, and you care a whole lot about people. I mean, why do we need to extract that higher to like, this is male and female?
That's a very good, masculine, feminine, not male, female.
Masculine, feminine.
Right,
sure.
But it's important, right? Because everyone assumes when I say masculine, I mean men, and I don't.
But why would you use such a problematic term then?
Okay, that's a good question. And the way I approach that is, one, it is my little bone to pick, with feminism and stuff. So, there is still in me a little bit of the old resentment of women and stuff like that. So I admit,
you're a hater, John.
I admit it all right out. But you can ask my girlfriend. I'm not a bad guy against women or anything, usually. But
you're not a bad dude. You're just a bad woman.
So the second thing, though, is this. These concepts were not only masculine, feminine, and attributing traits to them was common sense 30 years ago. And for the last 100,000, or since language started, wait, let me finish. Yeah. Since language started, that was common sense. Okay, so in the last 30 years of human history, those concepts have been forcefully removed via political correctness. So when you ask me why I want to add this thing in, I'm not really adding anything, although I am, because now the young liberal people view my thing as like really weird,
but there's lots of
like
views
possibly sexist. But I'm just going back to what it's always been and fleshing it out a little bit, and to take the sexism away from it. I believe that the nuances of my theory help to take the sexism away, because masculine used to mean men to a lot of dummies, but it doesn't really mean that when you read the philosophers and stuff. They speak of it as a quality, a fundamental thing.
There's a lot of ideas, though, that were common sense 30, 40 years ago that we would not want to take as more true.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're right because they're old, and I just said I'm adding to them. But I'm just saying that the burden of proof is on the PC person to take away the language.
So here's where
they're taking away the words.
I find the biggest problem is the mismatch of it. So that when someone has a very distinct personality that might line up in any number of ways, but they all happen to line up with masculinity or female, and that doesn't match their physical gender, it's an uncomfortable position to be.
Right.
And you're also saying that all of your great strengths really have to do with you being like something that you're not. And there's almost a lack of...
No, because, well, yeah, I get it. But
that's a fractured identity on some points, and that your weaker parts are the part that have to do with your physicality, and your better parts have to do with being another gender.
Right, but it's like saying that the word sociopath is connoted to, like, psychopathy, basically. Serial killers,
sure.
And just
not a pleasant person.
They have no emotions. A lot of things that people think about sociopathy. And when the fact is, it's not the case. Most people who rate on the sociopath scale, they've never killed anyone, and they
just assholes.
Yeah, they have problems with social interaction, but they feel things all the time too. So that thing is wrong too. So it's like saying, why use the word sociopath when the use of that word is likely to cause a misunderstanding about real individuals?
That's why
should we use
continually reinvent words, though, and they don't, to dissociate them with those negative responses. But my problem is giving ownership over to certain values over to a particular gender, and so that you get to own this piece of humanity that is universal to all of them. That there's more ownership by naming it that way, automatically attributed to people who have that gender naturally from birth.
Yeah, okay, but to me, your way and Eddie's way is like covering up our ears and closing our eyes and saying, women are competitive all the time. Why give masculinity ownership of that, even though men dominate at every game and everything? And I don't think it's because they're better. I don't think it's because men are better at every game and everything. Right. It's because they're more competitive and they're more single-minded and willing to give up the rest of life.
I think you can say something, though, without being anyone attacking you, to say men are more often competitive that no one would have an issue with. But to say that competition is masculine is a different step to take. It gives ownership over it. To say that there's a tendency more of this gender for this or that, I think that's people are more likely to agree with you and not have an issue with that.
But then they tell you that it's all because of what we're taught. And I don't agree with that.
And I think you can still disagree with that and still say that no, men are more likely to be able to do more push-ups or pull-ups than a female could do.
Right.
And I think you can still talk about the fact that there are some women who can do push-ups and pull-ups, but yes, a man is more likely to do this, or a man is more likely to have certain traits and describe these traits, even if it is that man more likely falls into these personality categories. But to identify them as masculine gives ownership over to those pieces. And when you're trying to pick people for roles, you're trying to offer opportunities to people, by giving that ownership to that person and making this split within their own identity, that they can't even identify with their own gender and yet still also identify with these types of traits.
Well, but Ryan, I mean, is that what happens? Because one of the values of this theory is that I've been able to acknowledge the feminine traits in myself, which are copious. There are many. When I lose a jiu-jitsu tournament, like I said before, I picked B. I picked choice B. I'm in a great mood. I love losing at a jiu-jitsu. Like, winning is even better, but when I lose, I'm so happy that it's over.
John,
what?
Have you ever considered that you're just a weirdo?
No, I'm trans. So, like, you know, I see feminine qualities in myself all the time. All kinds of things where I know that I know 10 men in my life who would have been way more manly in such and such a situation.
You wouldn't feel bad then if someone pointed to a number of qualities and then came to the conclusion that overall you're an effeminate person and that you have way more feminine characteristics than you have masculine. They wouldn't be bothered by that.
Well, if they told me I have way more, I would dispute it because it'd be wrong. But if they told me I'm 52% feminine, I'd deal with it because I already think it's true. So no, to be honest with you, I'm saying it right now on the radio. I'm more. It's close. It's a close call with me, but I'm probably more feminine than masculine, and part of that is social conditioning.
Yeah, but how important is it to you though to maintain that you align yourself with masculine strengths and the most important masculine strengths that you
very important to me, but when I practice Zen Buddhism, I view that as expressing the feminine side of myself, and when I fight and do stuff, I consider that masculine, and
do you not see the tension then when someone else who those are not their strengths, they have the opposite strengths which you would call feminine, and when they're trying to strive and better themselves in those strengths, have to identify and call themselves more female, more feminine in that process. That puts that person in a position where they have to say, yep, if I want to get better, what my strengths are, I have to become more feminine.
Well, see, the fact that I just said that about myself makes, to me, it's just a perspective thing. It doesn't bother me, but I guess you're saying this is traumatic to the rest of the population.
Yeah, because when you're putting out an image of this is what a man is, and then you realize you don't live up to that, and you don't match it.
But my theory wouldn't do that. My theory wouldn't allow you to say this is what a man is.
But we live in where we live,
I think I'm going to go with Ryan on this, though. I think for most, their minds are not that elastic. Like, it's too hard to separate the baggage of cultural, masculinity and femininity, and not find an identity. It's like,
but to me, that's the cultural problem. Them not being able to handle it is the problem, not the word that makes them feel bad. That's not the problem.
Though, is to say that no matter who you are, you're still whatever gender you identify as, and then that's what it is. And to not put these labels on it.
My thing has no problem with calling yourself the gender that you feel like.
No, but the idea is that if I can just be whatever I am, and I don't have to measure whether what I'm being is masculine or feminine. The idea is I'm just being whatever I'm being, and yes, that's either more or less aligned with people other than my gender, whether I'm the minority or the majority, no longer matters.
All right, I'm going to give you the last. Well, I'm going to say something, but you're erasing. To me, you're just saying, why use the words if they cause trouble? Why do it? What's the point? And to me, what you want, or what the PC wants, is erasing a truth because it's inconvenient. It's erasing it because not because you proved that I'm wrong and that those things aren't masculine, but because you proved, and fairly well, that it's harmful. It can be harmful to some people to use those words. So it's not that I'm wrong. It's that it could make people feel bad. And now we've erased a truth in order to preserve those feelings.
I think you could get into a space where you could still identify the fact that there's a lot of men who have these traits more often, and men often have these traits that you've named and labeled whatever you wanted to name and label. And you could identify and say, yep, men are more often this, and no one would have a problem with you saying that men are more likely to go about it in the situation.
You don't know enough feminists, man, to say no one would have a problem. You can't.
I wouldn't say no. I'm not. No one is too strong a word, but
if I was explaining anything to some feminists, I would, before I finished the sentence, I would be mansplaining and I would be a sexist and kicked off of the blog.
That's a particular person who's not being reasonable. But I think most reasonable people, if you said men are more likely to be this, but not saying that this thing is masculine. I think it's a space that a lot of people inhabit.
It's a silly sleight of hand to me. It's like, ooh, I won't say masculine, but I'll say men are more. It seems like, I don't know what's the point of that?
Because then you could be any gender at any time and have those things, and there not to be a disconnect or an unmatching between what you are and what you're supposed to be.
Okay, that's the last word on it. Thank you very much for that. I'll think about it. I don't know. There's weak points in my thing, and you and Eddie have pointed them out. So
yeah,
I'll give it some thought. We should end it, but
by all means.
let's just talk real quick about something that is really interesting to me. Let's try to give like a brief history of physics, okay? Modern physics. So you got a relativity in the turn of the century, 1900s. Einstein comes along and discovers relativity, and he delivers a bunch of laws, fundamental laws of the universe, such as the speed of light, very important one, and gravity. In fact, the whole relativity theory was meant to accommodate gravity, to make it make sense. But the speed of light, very important, also known as c, and it's also the speed at which radio waves, any massless particle travels at c, and it's a couple 100,000 miles per second.
Pretty fast.
And it's quick.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can't go the speed of light. If matter cannot go the speed of light, and it certainly can't go faster. Okay, so under relativity. And that's been, in Einstein's general and special relativity, been proven over and over and over, still today, that when you use them for big calculations, they work. Except for the movement of galaxies. Those aren't doing what we think they should do, so they invented dark matter, crapped it out as a placeholder, in my opinion. Now, quantum physics also first got off the ground late 1800s. The first theories started to come out about that, but it's been much slower to be adopted. Einstein was a huge hated it. He said it's not true and it's not, can't be. So quantum physics, though, will tell you some interesting things like the behavior of a particle. In other words, whether an electron or a photon behaves as a wave or a particle, like in other words, a billiard ball or a sound wave, that is completely dependent upon observation of it. So the watching it, in other words, makes it collapse into a particle. And when you're not watching it, it comes out as a waveform, a wave distribution.
Or more like if you test for one or the other. So if you look for it to be a particle, it essentially acts as a particle.
Right.
If you look for it to be a wave, it appears to behave as a wave.
Yeah, very weird stuff. That's called the double, well, that was revealed by the double slit experiment. So now, that's very interesting stuff, you know, and it almost too easily fits in with a lot of Buddhist and New Age type thinking, and idealism and German philosophy, that, you know, everything we see is just like a hologram, basically, that is being created by our perception of it. In other words, when you close the refrigerator door, does the light bulb go off? Sure. Well, in a way, what these people are saying is there's nothing in the fridge at all when you close that door because no one's looking at it, in other words. So, but that's a huge oversimplification. Sure. So another interesting thing in quantum physics is quantum entanglement. This is another thing that breaks Einstein's laws bad. So quantum entanglement says two particles, or I think particles, can become entangled in such a way that no matter the distance between them, it could even be the width of the universe, no matter the distance, they're entangled in such a way that when one particle behaves or does something, the other particle will do it instantaneously at the exact same time. Now that's the communication of the transfer of information. Basically,
right.
we would consider that information transfer. Like they're doing the same thing. They know what the other one is doing.
Spinning clockwise, and the other one's spinning. You know, is going to be spinning the exact same way, also clockwise, a universe away. The idea is that if we change one to counterclockwise, for the other one to also change to counterclockwise at the same time, information would have to have passed backward to have that knowledge to spin that way.
And it can't do that faster than light.
In some way, though, there has to be a connection,
right,
that is happening instantaneously.
And what recently came out is that quantum entanglement has been demonstrated since the 70s, I think, if not earlier. Earlier,
yes.
And now what they've done now is more precise things that really show it. So there
was room for error and doubt previously, although they were pretty sure,
because none of this shit makes sense.
Sure. Well, we'll wait to see how this stands up to peer review. I think it's still a little early, based on you're referring to the recent experiment. I think they did it in
Germany or something.
They did it something crazy, like they made the test like 183 times. It seems exhausted. but we'll see if it stands up.
But even
we'll
if this study falls, you're still 99% sure that there's quantum entanglement because of previous research.
Right. I mean, there is. So in the 60s, there's a guy by the name of Joseph Bell who came up with something called Bell's inequalities,
right.
Which basically, so going back to your refrigerator about, is there food in the refrigerator or not? There's a very famous scientific thought experiment called Schrodinger's cat, which basically is, I'm going to paraphrase this and I'm going to get it wrong because this is the strangest way to phrase this.
I know.
But they basically have some sort of radioactive element in a box with a cat.
With a cat.
In
space.
Right. And so there's a 50% chance or so of this isotope reaching its half-life and decaying and basically killing the cat.
A thing that kills the cat.
So it
became off, cyanide breaks.
A shorthand way of basically saying we don't know. The cat could be alive or dead, but nobody really knows until they usually the cat is placed in the box with a radioactive isotope. And once you open up the box, it's surprise, your cat is alive, or surprise, your cat is dead.
But the conclusion was, though, that the cat is both simultaneously alive and dead.
Well, the thought experiment, though, isn't necessarily meant to actually have a cat that's both alive and dead so much as to demonstrate that this is fucking weird, and that on a microscopic level we appear to have rules that make sense on this molecular level of electrons and whatnot, and then on the macroscopic level, that seems batshit fucking crazy.
Right.
But the idea of even being to see or know if the cat is both alive and dead or not, that's not really so much what you're trying to do. It's just that this is fucking ridiculous.
Well, it's a paradox.
Right. Well, going back to Bell's, he basically came up, he wrote some theorems that essentially predict how often probabilistically if you have two particles, and let's say the quantum physical term for this is called superposition, where basically you have two particles, they are both in some unknown state. Now, if they are entangled, you look at particle A, and let's say it is spinning clockwise. Therefore, if entanglement is true, it will always have the opposite reaction, which means it will then be spinning counterclockwise.
The partner particle?
Right. So basically, you have probabilities that basically say, okay, if we observe particle A and it's no longer in a superposition, and it comes down to whatever state it happens to be in, B then has two choices. B can either be entangled, and it comes down as well, and will therefore be the opposite of whatever state particle A is in, or B will remain in a superposition. So Bell basically came out with what's called the Bell inequalities that essentially say that we can predict probabilistically through math and say we know how often this should occur. And essentially based on empirical evidence, we have blown the Bell inequalities out of the water and basically say we observe that when particle A comes down out of its superposition and gets into its state, particle B also comes out of its superposition. It does not remain in a superposition. And so, therefore, based on an empirical evidence, entanglement is therefore true. I would think,
good explanation,
based as what I understand, most scientists, most physicists believe in entanglement these days and have for many decades.
They're already operating on it.
Yes. We are trying to do quantum computing, which is essentially we are trying to entangle electrons to basically simulate bits and do the same thing as we do with silicon.
Infinite or
and
speeds.
That exists. They have quantum computers right now that are getting more sophisticated. Right now, they're not practical, and they use kind of brute force methods to kind of crunch gigantic numbers. But they don't really. You're not getting one in your home anytime soon.
But even the ones that exist they're not faster than other the traditional supercomputers, right?
You might be able to talk about this more than Abe.
No, not yet.
They're just brute force machines.
Theoretically, it is hopeful that we will reach that point. Whether we actually will or not, it remains to be seen.
Yeah, the more you read about it, it's this might be a bullshit thing that's not going to come true.
They're not really sure.
Like AI might not happen.
But the idea, though, being that you could have a bit that is both 1 and 0, and whatever wherever you need it to be,
right.
it can instantly be there. Because all of what computers come down to is, we're talking about speed, is how fast you can switch from one to the other.
Oh.
So from this being a 0 or a 1, I mean, that's a simplification, but basically we're talking about how fast a switch can go from one side to the other,
right.
and that binary. So if it can be both at the same time until exactly the moment you want it to be, that's impressive.
That's a big deal.
Or with security software, the idea is that I want to see if someone's about to open this door, and now I can tell immediately the second something changes on this part of the world that I know someone just broke into something.
Right, yeah.
So going back to what you brought up, the original experiment that this had been done, it was significant, as you guys had pointed out. It was the first experiment in which they're claiming there are no loopholes. They have essentially accounted for all possible variables. I think a lot of critics of entanglement will say, yeah, every experiment we've had thus far has had some sort of loophole, something in which some variable was not accounted for. And so therefore, maybe something else could be happening here.
Right. But anyway, it's fascinating to me, this idea that C might not be the constant that it's supposed to be, and it might not be the cosmic speed limit. That would open doors for not only explaining psychic phenomena scientifically someday, or faster than light travel, which if we will never ever go to another solar system. The closest star to us, what is it? Which one is that? What is it, Paula?
The sun.
Oh yeah, the next one,
like Alpha Centauri or something like that.
Yeah, the next one. So that's the next solar system in our galaxy, right? And we're never going there in a ship that goes less than the speed of light ever.
Yeah,
much less the other side of the galaxy, and much less another galaxy. The distances are we'll never. Yeah, it took 9 years to get to Pluto, and the next star is millions of times farther.
It was a robot going to Pluto too.
Right. It was just a fucking piece of metal flying through space.
A little rock essentially going through space.
Yeah. No one had to survive.
But with a fuckload of math to make sure it got there.
It's amazing how they did that. Those pictures are so beautiful to me. I was counting down that New Horizons spacecraft for a year. I was watching that clock tick down, and that week I got so excited. It was like I was going to a party or something.
Sure.
Like, I loved it, and then the pictures started coming out, and more are coming. By the way, the data link is very slow, and it's going to take a long time to get
the higher res stuff that's taking longer. Is that what it is?
No, I don't think it's going to be any higher res, but it will be other pictures. And they have they have one from the surface almost of the planet. It looks like, and it's just so crazy. And that planet is surprising the hell out of astronomers, geologists, astrophysicists, all the scientists that work on planetary science, and they're really shocked by how strange it is. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know, man, because we talked about gravity on this show, and I have a big problem with gravity. The question of the speed of gravity, the propagation rate of gravity, is a very tricky question. It's never been measured directly. So what the propagation rate means is that all mass in the universe attracts other mass. That's what gravity is. So when you put two balls in space, they're both attracting each other. So eventually they'll collide if there's nothing else around to divert them. Now, what I mean by the speed of gravity is, say you were able to use a Star Trek transporter, and you could transport the billiard ball into space.
Okay.
And the other one was already floating there, like 1 million miles away, let's say, or 10 miles away. Doesn't matter. So you use the transporter beam to beam the ball.
Right, so there's no momentum. It's just there.
Right, it's just there. How long will it take for the information of gravity to start pulling the two balls towards each other? So at second 0, the ball appears out of the transporter. How long will it take, if the other ball is 1 million miles away, for it to start to feel the pull of gravity? And the answer is that it's instantaneous. And that's a very strange thing.
Right. Well, I think if I understand, I'm not a physicist. Einstein's theory of relativity, he's got general and special. Basically, gravity is not a force. Gravity is warping of space-time.
That's how he accommodated this strange fact.
Right.
Because it breaks C. It breaks the speed limit.
Right, but essentially you are being put in a space which is therefore warped. So therefore, as soon as you would come into existence...
How far can we take his little metaphor?
In a warped space-time, it would immediately start acting upon you.
As if you were on a hill.
Right. You don't need the information to know that you're on a hill. It's just immediately on the hill.
Right.
Like,
rolling.
Earth is not reaching its big invisible arm out through the ether to grab you and suck you in.
Right.
It's Earth is wrinkling space-time around it, which causes you to move inward towards it.
And that's what gravity was troubling physicists in the late 1800s really bad. They didn't know why it had an instantaneous effect. So Einstein, who wanted C to be the speed limit, made it all make sense. But how my thing is that warping of space-time, that fucking metaphor that we hear so much. How far can we take that? Is that like the equations work? The equations work, but is the metaphor true?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Okay, let me explain it to you. I'll give you an example. Take the sheet on your bed and spread it out. So that's have you heard this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But go ahead.
And then you take a bowling ball, and we'll call that Earth, and we will drop it in the middle of the sheet.
And someone's holding all the four
corners.
Right,
and everyone's holding the four corners so that the sheet is taut, so to speak. Now, if you put a ball on one of the corners there, it's going to immediately roll towards
I know what
the
warping
bowling ball.
means. My question is that what's really...
Well,
what's space? Space isn't a sheet. Space isn't a thing. So the metaphor is really bad.
Space, because you also have gravity pushing
Which
it down that hill.
You can't show on a...
I'm really light on my Einstein in general.
Me too.
But going back to a paper I wrote, as a sophomore in college or something like that. But part of it is they've also used these theories to predict how light will be affected by gravity coming from stars. And so a lot of the points like, all right, we can actually, if we implement this theory, we can see how light traveling these immense distances is actually affected also by these gravity wells.
That's right. And it does suck light.
And so
gravity sucks light.
So this stuff is used in astronomy, and a lot of the things that we're doing and studying across space with these telescopes and whatnot is...
No, that's a good point. I knew that it's all verified. I knew that the equations are verified.
But
it's just
beyond theoretically and mathematically, but just like...
But the metaphor has been verified too in what you're saying by the bending of light. And that's a very good point.
Yeah.
You can see it happening, and then you can predict, I bet the star is actually over there when it looks like this, and it will be there.
And this might be a reach, but part of this is, again, like you talked about a couple of weeks ago, is how they figure out that there's a planet going by something.
Right. That too.
Yeah.
That's more like interference of light, but yeah.
Another thing, again, this is maybe based like some pop Einstein, so I could be wrong about this, but Einstein really liked the idea, and most Western science has, of the idea of constants.
Yeah.
He did not like probability as a concept. The idea that if you did the same thing however many times, it should happen exactly the same time.
Right.
Which is also the basis of a lot of science in general.
God does not play dice.
God does not play dice, which is the famous quote, which a lot of people point towards, Einstein's religion on some level.
Yeah,
if anything, he was just believe kind of the universe has God.
He wasn't very religious, but
people like to get Einstein on your side.
Right.
He's a pretty heavy
or
hitter.
Hitler's on the other side.
Right. Yeah. Hitler, Einstein, can't do too wrong with this.
Right. But there is the idea, though, that, and we all kind of go along this when we're building our theories, is that you can go so far with your own piece, but then the certain things just don't feel comfortable to integrate back into your theory because it starts to make the other pieces more wobbly. And wobbly is uncomfortable.
Well, distant galaxies are not behaving the way they should according to his equations, and I think and I have no basis for anything, but I think it's because the laws of physics are different in other galaxies, even within this visible universe. I think I don't think they're constant.
It is definitely a old and ingrained
laws
dogma.
It's a very Western.
The concept of
it's
laws.
so Western European,
but at the same time, it's the idea of laws has been so remarkably fruitful in terms of us figuring anything out.
I know.
So wanting to veer away from the idea of laws, almost the idea of going more liberal. And going away from the idea that everything's constant of what is or isn't happening, and the idea that it could be influenced by people, that conditions affect outcomes that might have gone differently, that also those conditions aren't just another physical entrance, but observation or probability. The exact same conditions could happen, but just does differently this time because that's what it was.
Quantum physics is on the way up more and more. It's already being used. I mean, the equations are already in practical use. But it's Einstein's. It's weird. I guess it's kind of like Newton's physics, where it worked really well until you got to very large, very small, very fast, very. And they
every theory like this relies on a model. And let's imagine it in this manner, and then what else can we intuit if this model's correct?
Right.
So then, by all these other things keep fitting more into the model, you go further with it. But at some point, you have the pieces that still don't fit in the model, and that's when you have the next.
One of my examples of why I was suspicious of dark matter was the Mercury.
Can I interrupt you? Yeah. Anyone who uses dark in the name. That's like really bad sci-fi right there.
Yeah.
Like if you have to use dark to describe something,
it's because
like,
they can't see it. But
man.
Yeah, it's silly.
Yeah.
And once you get into it, when you go look up what dark matter is. The answer is I don't know.
I know.
Nothing. We don't know anything except it's like matter, but it's not there.
Right.
So anyway, and dark energy too, which is it's even stupider. But that's supposed to make up 60% of the universe.
Of things that defy our reasoning.
Right. So here's a great example of that. Mercury, the orbit of Mercury around the sun, did not go the way it was supposed to go. According to Einstein's, according to whatever the science of the day, it was before Einstein. We had really good physics, and we could track Neptune perfectly and the moons of Jupiter, but Mercury wasn't going right. So for decades, it was almost mainstream science to say that there's a planet called Vulcan, and it's in the solar system, and it's dragging Mercury out of its orbit. So it's like a dwarf planet called Vulcan. And that was their explanation. And then they figured out what was it? It was a precession or some concept that made Mercury make sense all of a sudden. They figured it out. And they were like, oh yeah, there's no Vulcan. So that it was a placeholder. And there's other examples of that too in science.
Often uses placeholder. I mean, in math, it's
to make their
root of -1, you call it I, and you move on, and you can keep doing your math equation.
Exactly. Yeah. To make the equation work, you just stick this wood block in there.
But it's a functional piece.
No, it's great. It's great. But I'm just saying, I think dark matter is going to go the way of Vulcan because there's enough. It doesn't mean anything. It's just there to account for the movement of galaxies that don't move at all the way they should according to their mass.
It's dark, man. It's dark.
It's dark stuff.
I wouldn't mess with it.
I'm scared.
All right, guys, we're going to split this into two pieces make it bite-sized for the folks. We did 2 hours. I had a great weekend with you guys, and we still got some time left.
An adventure and a half.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on the show, and someday it'll be famous, and then you guys will be on a famous show.
Yeah, the classic era.
Yeah.
First season.
First 100 episodes.
Yeah, I wasn't the first episode, but I was first season. You got to give me that guy.
You were first season.
I was there, man.
You were there.
First season.
I felt it.
So thanks, guys.
So raw back then.
And happy Halloween to everybody out there, and have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.